thank you guys for this opportunity to speak to you. I don't usually get introduced and compared to Lady Gaga. But tomorrow I'm wearing a suit made out of meat, so you guys got it. Some people are looking like, what is he talking about? But anyway, so thank you guys. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here with you today. I doubt that I'll be able to give you the best speech you've ever heard tonight. My teleprompter got left at the office, so I'm going to have to wing it. So we're going to wing it. No, well, thank you. Actually, I'm really excited to speak to you today, and excited at what you're a part of, and because much like this country was back in the early 1980s, America's once again in a moment of decision. Ronald Reagan gave a very famous speech before 1980, quite frankly, the decade before 1980, called A Time for Choosing. And what he outlined was a decision that Americans had to make about what kind of country we wanted to be and what role we wanted government to play in our lives. It's not a new choice. In fact, it's a choice that virtually every generation of American leadership has had to make. And for much of our history, that choice was pretty clear. America wanted to be different. America wanted to be special. And what separated us from the rest of the world wasn't just our political system. Our political system is something we should always embrace and be proud of. Our republic is unique, and we should embrace it. We should always understand that we decide issues in this country that other nations have to fight wars over among themselves. But that's not what really separates us from the world. What's always separated us from the world is that in America, it doesn't matter where you came from or what your parents did for a living. If you had a good idea and you were willing to work hard, anyone from anywhere could accomplish anything. For those of us who were born and raised in this nation, in an era of relative peace and prosperity, sometimes it becomes easy to forget that and to take it for granted. But the fact is that this is an exception rather than the rule. In fact, what we know as life in America is almost an impossibility almost anywhere else at all in human history. There's never been a place like this. We should never be embarrassed to say that, because it's true. We should never be embarrassed to see America for what it is, as unique and exceptional and set apart from the rest of the world. But we also have to understand that that was a choice. That wasn't an accident. That didn't happen on its own. It didn't develop from one night to the next because we're smarter than everybody or God loves America more than he loves other nations. It was the product of choices that were made by the people who worked in this city and across this country before us. They chose to have an exceptional America. And often that meant difficult decisions and sacrifices, but a clear and conscious choice that America wanted to continue to be different. And that was the choice that America had to make in the early 1980s. In a time of a lot of uncertainty about our future. Some who argued and believed that America was on the decline, that believed that Soviet-style communism was inevitable to spread across the world, and that America had to embrace and accept a world order where we would somehow have to be second place to emerging powers, primarily the Soviet Union. But there was a voice at that time in the American political scene named Ronald Reagan, who said not only was that not true, but that in fact everything that the Soviet Union represented was destined to fail and fail miserably. And people literally laughed. They didn't chuckle, they didn't disagree, they laughed at him. They believed that what he said was absurd. He also talked about the notion that America could once again be great, that it could be the leading military power in the world and the leading economic power in the world, that somehow our future could be better than our history. And again, his critics didn't just chuckle or disagree, they laughed. They believed that after Vietnam and the Watergate era and the malaise of the late 70s, that America would never be the same, that we would still be an important and significant country, but not the exceptional land that Reagan knew as a boy and the one he had grown up in. But Ronald Reagan knew better, because Ronald Reagan knew that our greatness never came from our government. It always came from our people. And that in the early 1980s, there was nothing wrong with the American people. And he knew that if we embraced the principles that had made us great in the past, they would make us even greater in the future. By the end of that decade, of course, history's already recorded what happened. The Soviet Union and its brand of communism didn't just not come to dominate the globe, it actually literally collapsed. By the way, an interesting aside, have you ever talked, as I've had the opportunity to do, with folks that knew and worked with Ronald Reagan at the time, do you realize that when he gave that speech where he said, tear down the wall, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, that there were actually people in his administration that kept taking that out of the speech? They believed that that language was too abrasive and too antagonistic, and that not presidential and didn't belong there, that it was unrealistic to expect that we could accomplish that. But Reagan knew a fundamental truth, and that is that this idea, this notion of wanting to accomplish your God-given ambition and your God-given dreams was not an American principle or an American dream. It was a universal one. And that the thing that distinguished us from the rest of the world is that we created a place here where it was possible. America is a place where people from all over the world would come because they couldn't be who God meant them to be in the nation of their birth. And that is literally what we are as a people. A collection of go-getters from all over the planet that could not accomplish their dreams and hopes or fulfill their God-given ambition in the nation of their birth. But here, nothing could stand in their way. That was Reagan's America in the early 1980s and late 1970s. It was the era that I grew up in. I tell people all the time when they ask me, where did you get your center-right conservative politics? Because I grew up in the era of Reagan. I grew up in an era where I watched and believed and knew that America's future could be greater than its past. And the Reagan era defined the next 20 years. Well, we're at another one of those juncture points now in American history where once again we have to choose whether we want to continue to be exceptional or are we prepared to become like everybody else. It is a choice that every generation before us has had to make, and now it's our turn. It's a choice that, by the way, it's at the core of everything that's been debated up here in Washington, D.C. I'm sure you've all watched, as has the country, at this whole debt debate and this debt limit debate. But the debt limit debate was not about the debt limit. The debt limit debate was at its core about what country we want moving forward. The facts are indisputable. The United States spends $300 billion a month. It has a government that spends $300 billion a month. $180 billion of that comes from money we collect in taxes and fees. The rest, $120 billion or so every month, comes from money that we borrow. That ratio is unsustainable as it is, but it's only destined to get worse. You see, the spending part of $300 billion is going to go up dramatically because we have made promises. This government and its leaders that were here before made promises that is going to increase that dramatically. Medicare balloons, Social Security balloons. In addition, the revenue part of it will not keep pace. Our economy is flatlined. It literally did not grow the last quarter. It literally, basically did not grow. Unemployment hovers at 9-something%, but the real unemployment figure, when you add in people that are underemployed and just stopped looking for jobs, gets close to 20%. 1 out of 5 Americans is unemployed, underemployed, or has simply given up. And that means that that revenue number, as a percentage of how much we spend, is only going to get worse as a percentage of the spending is going to balloon, but the revenue part is going to stay stagnant. In addition, the $120 billion we borrow a month, that's completely unsustainable. And we will, if we keep doing what we're doing now, if nothing changes, we will have a debt crisis that will make the last one you saw look like child's play. Because this last debt crisis was basically because we wouldn't pass a law to raise the debt limit. The next debt crisis may be one where they won't lend us money because they don't think we can pay them back. And the warnings are out there from everyone. There will come a day, if we do not stop doing what we're doing now, where the world will refuse to continue to lend us money, or if they do lend us money, will lend us money at high interest rates because they don't see a path forward for America. The math is simple, and quite frankly, everyone agrees that this is true. But there is a sharp disagreement about how to address it. On the one hand, you have those who believe, well, the only way to address this is to just increase taxes. There's a group of people out there that makes too much money, and they're not paying their fair share, and our job is to take money from them. And I will confess to you that it is a position that enjoys some popular appeal in America. After all, most people, even those making $250,000 a year, don't consider themselves to be rich. When you think of rich, you think of billionaires, real billionaires, and multimillionaires. And so there's some appeal out there in the public perspective. Well, why not? Why shouldn't people that are making a lot of money pay more? There is also the belief, although I think it's less significant, that the way you grow your economy is through the government. If the government just spent a little bit more money, if we had more programs to do certain things, that somehow the economy would grow as a result of it. And that's one school of thought about how to approach it. Now, the people and Americans who believe that here in Washington, they're no less patriotic than any of us. But their theory stands in sharp contrast with what I believe is the reality of what's made us great up to this point. And that's the second thought process, the one that I think most of us in this room find ourselves in. And it's the idea that, yes, we need more revenue for government, but that revenue shouldn't come through new taxes. It should come from new taxpayers. It should come from growth in our economy. And it's a simple equation. If more people are working, that means more people are paying taxes. And if more people are paying taxes, that means it's generating more money for your government to pay down its debt. But if you use that additional revenue to simply grow your government, you're not solving anything. And so the second part of the equation has to be we limit the growth of spending. And yes, that means looking at discretionary spending, you know, the amount of money that we spend on a yearly basis on different programs that are not required by law. But that's a small sliver of our overall budget. The truth is that the big growth in spending are in programs like Medicare, that, by the way, if we don't reform them, will cease to exist. If we want to save them, we have to reform them. There's another thing I would tell you, and that is that history teaches us that I don't care who's in charge, a conservative, a liberal, a Democrat, Republican, if you let politicians spend money that they don't have, they will do it. If the choice is between spending money they don't have or cutting spending, they will raise money they don't have. They will spend money they don't have. And that's why we need spending caps and a balanced budget amendment. All but one state in this country have that. Two different schools of thought. I should step back and say, when you argue about how do you create more taxpayers instead of raising taxes, there are two things that our government can do right now to reinvigorate the American economy. One is tax reform, which is not simply tax increase. It's simplifying our tax code, making it simple and flat and fair, so that when people go here, the government doesn't use the tax system to pick winners and pick losers. It uses it to generate revenue for government, but in a way that doesn't destroy job creation. Job creators are begging for a tax code that's simple and certain. The second thing they want is regulatory reform. I cannot exaggerate to you how onerous this administration's decisions on regulations have been. Consistently now, every single day, from Washington, D.C., regulations and rules are being written that are literally destroying jobs in America on a weekly basis. They are trying to accomplish through rulemaking and unelected agencies what they cannot accomplish through the political process, be it environmental policy or union labor policy. They are creating an environment in America through a complicated tax code and onerous regulations that are making it a less desirable place to do business. In fact, when people are willing to tell you that it is easier to do business in communist China than it is in the United States of America, you know you're heading in the wrong direction. And so for us, the equation is simple. Grow your economy and limit your spending. And if we could do that, these issues become a lot easier to manage. And that's the debate. Because these are two different views of the role of government in America. Two very different views of where we should be as a nation. And between those two views, there's very little middle ground. And when people talk about compromise, I'm not against it. But compromise has to be a solution. If the compromise is not a solution, you're wasting people's time. We're not deciding here whether we're going to have 6 judges versus 12 judges, or whether we're going to name a post office after this guy instead of that guy. This is a fundamental difference of opinion about what kind of government we want to have. And the answer to that question will determine what kind of country we have for your generation and beyond. You see, much of the world has chosen to have a government that's very involved in our economic lives. And I will confess this is kind of a simplistic view of it, but I think an accurate one nonetheless. Much of the world has chosen to have a government very active in their economic lives. That means a government that guarantees you all sorts of things. But in exchange for those guarantees, there are things you have to give up, primarily your economic freedoms. Literally, your ability to open up a business out of the spare bedroom of your home. The ability to draw a business plan on the back of a napkin and go out and max your credit card and open up a business because you believe so much in this idea. Much of the world has chosen that economic model. And they seem relatively happy up until very recently, when even Europe figured out that even their high taxes and high regulations could not sustain what they had created. But what you give up is the vibrancy of the American economy. And I think what Reagan had argued and what we should argue today is that that's fine for the rest of the world to choose that. And if that's the kind of country you want to live in, a place where the government guarantees you certain economic results, there are so many places in the world you could move to. But there should be at least one country on earth where you can open up a business in the spare bedroom of their home. There should be at least one country on earth where you should be able to open up a business after drawing a business plan out on the back of a cocktail napkin. There should be at least one country on earth where a worker can become an owner, where an employee can become an employer. There should be at least one nation on earth where these things are possible. And for the last 230 some odd years, that country's been the United States. And we shouldn't change that now. And so, behind the noise of the debt debate, that is really what we're arguing about. And as divided as Washington is, so is America. This generation of Americans wants it both ways. We have to choose. Do we want to continue to be the country that our parents knew, the singular, exceptional place? Or are we prepared to become just another country just like everybody else, still rich, still powerful, still important, but no longer exceptional? That is the choice. And that is the debate. And I know that sometimes it's scary to think, wow, well, why not become like everybody else? Why do we have to continue to be the leading this or the leading that? My answer to you is that I'm not sure we want to live in a world where America is not the America you knew. I'm not sure I'm prepared to raise my children in a world where America's light is extinguished and new lights take its place. I'm not sure the world is better off if America were diminished and other nations that are on the rise were to increase. Who would live and speak out on behalf of the values of liberty and freedom? After all, the liberties and freedom we've known are largely the exception rather than the rule in human history. The idea that somehow people could govern themselves was almost unheard of up until 200 and some odd years ago. And even in much of the world now, people still scoff at it. Who would speak on behalf of these principles? The idea that somehow you don't have to be born into the right family in order to succeed. That somehow the same businesses and the same individuals should come to dominate the economy generation after generation. The rejection of a political caste system or an economic caste system. Who would serve as a living, breathing example that it doesn't have to be that way? You see, all over the world, even people that don't like America admire Americans because there is someone just like them who was able to do here what they were not able to do there. And that's what sets us apart. That's what America's meant for 200 and some odd years. You see these other countries that are emerging around the world and pulling their people out of poverty? They're not doing it by embracing socialism. They're doing it by embracing the market. And the more they embrace the principles we stood for, the more prosperity they find. But if America stops being America, what nation or people on earth are prepared to take our place? There is no one. There is no other country. There's nowhere else to go. And so the debate we are having is about whether we will continue to be that kind of country. Or are we prepared to be the first Americans to allow our nation to diminish? And the work you do and the stuff you're involved in politically is really about that. This is no longer an ideological or intellectual argument about big government versus small government, conservatives versus liberals. This is literally a decision about our identity as a people and as a nation. That is what we're deciding. And we will have to make a choice faster than any generation before us has had to make it, because the world moves faster than it ever has. So that's the great challenge of our time, and I find it to be exciting, and here's why. Because I believe that if we embrace the things that made us great in our past, our future will be greater than our history. There are more people on earth than ever before that will be able to afford to buy the things that you invent and you build. There are more people than ever before around the world that will be able to be our partners economically and diplomatically and culturally. There are more opportunities for Americans today than ever to sell our goods and services, if only we stop heading in the wrong direction and embrace the things that have brought us to this point. This is the great challenge of this generation of leadership, which you will fully inherit. And I encourage you to remain politically involved, because the decisions we are making will determine what America will look like forever. That's how dramatic the choices we are about to make. And I hope that in the next months that lie ahead and through the elections of 2012, the American people will speak with a very simple and clear voice that we've seen the two choices. We understand the hard work and sacrifices that lie ahead, but we still choose to be great. We still choose to be special. We still choose to stand apart. We still choose to inspire the world. And I hope you'll be a part of that as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, what's your time frame? Okay, we have two.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to, I have a few minutes to take questions. Someone's already lined up. Let's do it.
Hi, Senator. My name is Faith, and first of all, I want to thank you for wearing your life band. I notice every time we're on the Senate floor, and you wear it.
I hope I have it on today. Hold on. Here it is. Yeah, I do.
Well, my question is, recently I've been doing a lot of journalism and writing a lot of things for my school that really have caused people to call me some really terrible things. How do you, in the midst of being called all kinds of names and having all kinds of accusations thrown against you, know that, or keep your center and know that what you're doing is right and good and true?
Well, largely the people that say stuff about you from a political perspective, no matter what you do, they're not going to like you. So the sooner you realize that, the more peace you have about it. By and large, I mean, the people talk about the rhetoric in modern politics today. It's always been heated. It's just that now we have more places for people to scream at you from, online and so forth. There are people that aren't going to like you no matter what you stand for. I think the important thing is you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Am I doing this? And it's a tough decision to make, and I think it sounds like you're a person of faith, hence your name, so no pun intended. And I would just say to you that you look to your faith a lot on those things, and because ultimately, in politics and in life, you have to ask yourself, am I doing this just to be loved by people, or am I doing this to make a difference? And I think it's important in a republic that you accurately represent and listen to the people that you serve. But ultimately, you also have an obligation to do what's right, even though it may not be what's popular in the eyes of some, and allow history to judge your work. And I'm not saying I always get that right. It's tough. No one likes to be disliked, I don't think. But I think if you come at your decisions after having thought about it carefully, you're principled about it, you've been upfront with people about where you stand and where you stand on the issues, and you're carrying through on it, that'll give you some peace. So I encourage you to continue to speak on your principles. And I say this to people whose principles I don't share. I admire people whose principles I don't share, as long as they have principles and they are willing to fight and articulate them, especially in our republic. It's very important.
Thank you.
Thanks, Faith. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Senator. My name is Roger, and I'm from South Carolina. I know you work very closely with Jim DeMint.
Yes.
And my second point is, I don't believe in infighting in the party. But at the same time, if the Tea Party-backed candidates like yourself weren't part of Congress now, Congress would look a lot different, and the debt ceiling debate would have been a lot farther left. So what are you and Jim and all the other SCF kind of guys doing for 2012?
Well, I haven't thought a lot about 2012. I know that Senator DeMint is always on the lookout for good candidates around the country who espouse the principles of limited government and embrace the principles that I've outlined that make us great. Let me just say one thing about the whole infighting argument that you hear about people. First of all, I don't take for granted you're all Republicans, because maybe you're not all. There's probably independents here and Democrats too, maybe. Maybe not, I don't know. But I would say that the Republican Party is extremely diverse. It's a big tent. And there are a lot of political viewpoints, and there are people that agree with me on economic policy but disagree with me on Libya, for example. So it's a big tent, and there's a lot of diversity of opinion. And I think the Republican Party has a lot more ideological diversity than the Democrat Party does on many of these issues. And so it's normal to have these debates. The second thing that I would say is that the 2010 election was a very clear referendum. You know, Barack Obama and others were elected in 2008 on a promise of hope and change and kind of transforming the culture of politics. But then they came into office, and the first two things he did was try to pass cap and trade, the stimulus package and the health care bill, and then follow that up with trying to do cap and trade. And there was a rejection to that. People didn't believe the stimulus package worked. We spent $800 billion of borrowed money and have no jobs to show for it. And then we went on to the health care bill, which has been a fiasco and a nightmare for job creation in America. And so they sent people up here with a very clear mandate, and that is maybe stop this stuff from continuing to happen. Almost like a restraining order on these things from continuing to happen. And I think those of us who were elected in 2010 who campaigned on very clear principles have an obligation to live up to those principles. I mean, I ran on a very clear platform, and that is this: I don't like what's happening in Washington. I intend to go up there, fight against it, and offer a clear alternative. And I think me and others that are up here are doing that. And I think it's silly, quite frankly, to criticize people for carrying out what they said they would do if they got elected. And if more people did that, I think the Republic would be better off. Thank you.
I'm Danny Oliver, and over the last 2 days we've been passing around a binder. People have been signing up who would either support you for president or vice president, or just who support you in general. And you know, I'm not going to put you in any awkward situation, obviously. But, you know, we do have 100 founding members of Students for Rubio in this binder right here, and, you know, you're not campaigning and you're not focusing on that, but what do we do with the energy that we have and the excitement that we have about your message to our generation? What do we do in the meantime?
Well, first of all, I intend to win my Nobel Peace Prize without being known to... You know what, I say this with real sincerity. I am flattered and honored that you guys would sign that and that you guys would put something like that forward. It really is flattering. And what I would say to you is twofold. Number one is, it really isn't about me. I'm just a person, literally. I'm just a person who shares your principles, and through a handful of blessings and opportunities have the chance at this moment in our history to serve in the political process. But there is no reason why any number of you can't one day, a few years from now, be standing behind this very podium or on the floor of the U.S. Senate. It's not about the people. It's about the principles. The principles are the ones that are timeless. Some of us get a chance for a limited period of time in our life to advocate for them. And I would ask you to turn your energy not behind individuals, although I'm flattered by it, but by the principles that we share. And we probably don't agree on 100% of the issues here, but I think we share a certain set of principles that are true, that have worked. They've worked in the past, they will work in the future, and that's what I ask you to get excited and encourage, and look for candidates that stand for those things, and reward people with your vote and with your work that not only campaign on these things, but once get elected, actually do something about it. So that's what I would encourage you to do. You will make a difference. Believe me, in this audience today, there are people that will serve in public office, from school boards to the United States Senate, and you can make a difference, and I encourage you to be involved in that and to take that enthusiasm and not just put it behind people, but put it behind principles. Because ultimately, the reason why we're still talking about Ronald Reagan isn't because he gave good speeches. It's because he stood for timeless principles that have served our nation well. I think I have time for 2 more questions. So, one more? Okay, I'm sorry. One more.
Hi,
yes, sir.
My name's Tim Duffy.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry.
My name's Tim Duffy from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I think most of us here would love to see a balanced amendment to the Constitution. How close are we, and how would you like to see one implemented?
Well, I don't know how close we are. Here's the truth. You need 67 votes in the Senate. We have 47 Republicans who all say they're for it, and we have 20 Democrats who have campaigned on a balanced budget amendment at one time or another. So I agree on it. I don't know how close we are per se, but I do believe that we're going to have a chance over the next couple months to really create some groundswell behind it. I think that if anything good has come from the debt limit debate, has elevated this discussion about the balanced budget amendment. And it's one of the things in the bill that's there, that it's kind of complicated to explain, but basically one of 2 things has to happen in order for the debt limit to be increased, the $1.8 trillion that's left that wasn't increased under this. And it's either this super committee has to report at least $1.8 trillion in cuts or deficit planning, which could include tax increases, by the way, which I wouldn't support, or the other is a balanced budget amendment be submitted to the states. I don't know why it can't be both, and I think we should get behind a balanced budget amendment and make it a defining and priority issue, not just over the next couple months, but in the 2012 elections. Thank you guys so much. I'm honored. Thank you.